Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Christine, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I'm so delighted to have you on because you are an expert in listening, and conflict resolution is so much about listening to ourselves and others. But
hmm
before we get to that part of our conversation, I would like to hear about you. So could you tell us about the first job you ever had as a young person?
Oh, the very like before 16 or yeah.
However you want to answer.
So I babysat at 13 a newborn, like a
Wow.
newborn. I know. What were they thinking? Like, it wasn't just enough to watch. Yeah, it was pretty intense. I mean, the family had a stillborn child. They had
Mhm.
an older daughter who I babysat, so she was under 5, so I was probably 12 when I was doing that, and then they had a stillborn. This was back when they would put women in the hospital when they had a C-section for a week.
Mm.
So I watched the 5-year-old for a week, like lived at their house at 13 while she was in the hospital. And then the newborn came and I was like, I don't know what they were thinking, but it was a lesson. And I mean, I was a very responsible child.
Yeah.
So I think they saw that. And but I look back and I think, well, I don't know. How did I figure that out? So it was the 70s. They wouldn't do that anymore. There'd be nurses and
That is
yeah,
so interesting when we look back on those first jobs, and sometimes they're big jobs. I mean, like
yeah,
that's you can't get much bigger than that.
yeah, yeah,
And 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 at the moment we feel up to it.
yeah,
And people are, I guess, when looking back, people are desperate enough
yeah,
that when
yeah.
they need help, they just will take the help that's available.
Yeah, well, and we lived in a neighborhood, and my parents were certainly up the road, and but I do remember also feeling the stress of that. It was a lot for a 13-year-old. Not the couple hours at a time, but when I was there that whole week, I remember like I was a pretty empathetic child, and I could feel the stress that it was to have something so constantly, to be looking after a 5-year-old all the time. So yeah, so it was a defining experience in a lot of ways, and I watched those kids till I was 18, years old, went off to college, but it was memorable. But my dad, I didn't like selling, but I was always a little entrepreneurial. I was always doing kind of different things like that. I didn't like the Girl Scouts or knocking on doors, but I did like to find ways to earn money. And I coached field hockey camps and I waitressed. And I'm from Hershey. I worked at Hershey Park. So, a lot of different things. Yeah.
That's a lot of different experiences before you go out to, quote unquote, maybe official work in the
Yeah.
world. So when you think about all of those younger experiences, which are quite varied, does one stick out to you as being memorable for good or for ill when it comes to the management?
So I had a wonderful manager. I worked at Pizza Hut, and it was comical. It wasn't really waitressing because we served people, but it was just chaos because it was right near the park. We used to put tables together. Fire codes were like just violated left and right. But his name was Ted. I can still picture him, and he was so good at managing people that were 18 years old
Mm.
and 19 years old. And he was just so easy to work for. And I wanted to show up for work for him. And I think it was just because he was humorous and he wasn't over the top and he just was steady. But he got us. He knew how to flex with us, and it was pretty impressive. I still think about him as a manager. I thought, what's he doing at Pizza Hut? He's pretty good at this. But that it was what it was. But yeah, he was really. I remember one time he thought I didn't know I was supposed to come in, and he called me and he said, I need you here. And I was like, and I had plans and I was like, okay, okay. And I went in because I knew he had flexed for me in other ways. He had
Mm.
made it possible for me I did hockey. I was a pretty high level field hockey player, and he accommodated me all the time. So I was like, yeah, if you need me to come in, I'm there. I'm coming in. Yeah. He was a good guy.
Gosh, that's such a wonderful experience to have as a young person
Yeah.
to have that feeling of belonging that this person is for me, so I'm going to be
Mhm.
for them,
Yeah.
right?
It makes a
And
difference.
yeah, yeah. So you're talking about his humor, him getting you, him being flexible. Um, are there any other traits? Because we're always interested in how we can emulate that
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Well, we did have fun. Like
Mm,
we were kids, I mean, relatively speaking. So, and he didn't try to stop that. He let us, we were hard workers, but he kind of just let us do what we did well.
mm,
So yeah, I think sometimes you just have to meet people where they are. I think he was really good at that.
mm,
He didn't try to change us or mold us to what he thought was the right way to be, and it worked because we worked hard. There were long shifts and like I said, lots of people. I mean, I have a table of 10, 12 people and doing a lot of and long hours. So, but it was fun. I made a lot of money at Pizza Hut as a waitress. I did very well. Unbelievably. Yeah.
I think we
Yeah.
definitely sell short managers at places like that, right?
Hmm.
Because if you can make it work, and one of the words you used was chaos, right?
Yeah.
Those places can be chaotic.
Yeah.
As you said, you're right by an amusement park, and so you've got people in all
Oh
states
my
of
gosh.
tiredness,
Yes.
hungriness, or whatever has
Yes.
happened. And anytime you're in the food industry, people a lot of time maybe their blood sugar is low or something.
Yeah.
They want what they want and they want it now. There's a
Yeah.
lot going on, but so then to be able and then to manage young people,
Yeah.
I mean, that is quite a skill to keep the balance and allow the fun, because that with young people can add to the chaos.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was fun. It was I mean, we've all had good managers and we've all had bad managers. I
Sure.
think, yeah, but I do remember him, and I worked with other managers there too, but nobody sticks out like he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where'd you go after that? Your first professional job?
So my first professional job, I was a home-based family therapist. So my first job out of college with a degree in psychology and no experience was knocking on people's doors saying, "Hi, I'll be your family therapist." I mean, it was really kind of crazy in a lot of ways. I was completely underqualified. It was a pilot program in the state of Pennsylvania that's still in existence today that was set up to deal with families who had children who had been out of the home, placed out of the home for psychiatric reasons. So
Mm,
they were in adjudicated children and youth. They had been psychiatrically hospitalized, and the idea behind it was you had to fix the system, not the identified patient. So kids would leave and get better, and then they'd come home and they'd regress.
mm,
So the idea was to intervene on the whole system and the family. So the good news of that job was I got trained by renowned family therapists that were second generation to Salvador Minuchin, who
mm,
was the founder of structural family therapy. So his first line of therapists that he trained me at
mhm,
22. So I that was pretty incredible. But yeah, but that was a constant learning experience. I learned a lot about conflict there, a lot about conflict because I when you're in people's homes
mm.
they become who they are. They're in their environment. So, and we had to set up video cameras to tape the session so that we could take it back for supervision. It was very intense. And I saw a lot of conflict at a different level than I could have imagined and probably haven't seen since in my career.
That is what an interesting first professional job. I mean, it's like babysitting that baby when
That,
you
good parallel. I hadn't thought of that. Yes.
being put in positions that maybe you shouldn't be put in,
Yeah.
which, when you think, well, why would a family do that? Because of resources, because of what's available, because of that's what they need. But then why would professional people who sometimes ought to know a little bit better, um, do it? And imagine as well, these are the resources and we got to get this program going. And this is also what's available.
Well, I actually beat out a lot of people for that job. So I don't mean to sound immodest in those situations, but you're linking something that I think is important is that I was well achieved in terms of I had a pretty good athletic career and I was successful. So I had that on my resume.
Yeah.
But I did have the ability to listen at a very young age because I learned that very young. And so I was very tuned in and everybody in that job was older than me. I think the next youngest person was 28. Most of the people that had the same job that I got was in that pilot program were in their 30s
Hmm.
and they had some experience. But I actually overachieved relative to even they did because I listened differently. I didn't go in and try to fix things the same way that others did because they had their experience and that became more of an enemy. I was very good at very quickly creating credibility with the family, joining with the family, and helping them feel trust. And that went a long way. And then then we were all getting trained in really how to make the fixes. I didn't need, they needed to teach me that, but they didn't need to teach me the other thing. So I think that helped a lot.
Yeah. So has that always, not talking about jobs, just about you as a person, that has that always been sort of a part of who you were, or is that something that you learned through experience, this listening and empathy?
Yeah. Well, jokingly to the therapist, I always say my first day on the job was the day I was born because my job in my family was to understand my mother's loss and pain. She had lost her mother from childbirth. Her mother had rheumatic fever as a child, and the doctors told her, "Don't have kids. Your heart won't hold up." They said you'll be dead in 3 months, and she ignored that advice, didn't listen to it, and that's in fact what happened. So
Mm,
my mother was born into the world knowing she was the cause of her mother's death
mm,
and that, she didn't have a mother. She felt she was motherless her whole life. So when she had a girl, I was the person that she kind of always wanted. And so there was a lot of burden in that and a lot of responsibility. So that's part of how I became a responsible child. But I learned to listen to what most people didn't listen to below the surface, what people didn't see. And my mother was also an amazing listener, very kind, loving. It wasn't darkness, it was just below the surface where her pain lived. And so that was how it started. And then I did realize as early as high school, anything I was accomplishing, it was usually threaded to the fact that I had this different ability that most people didn't have. Like I was only overachieving because of that, not because of any other real talent or abilities, including on the sports field.
mm,
So yeah, so that has been consistent. And then just to fast forward, when I got into working for businesses and beyond families, I saw that the reason things were failing was usually because of what people weren't listening to or understanding, not what that was being said. And that's, I think, ties into what you talk about so much with conflict is that we miss so much. And so I saw the reason I was succeeding is the reason people were failing. And
mm,
I thought, let's do something about this because we're not taught to listen, we're told to listen.
mm. Could you talk a little bit about how that skill of listening helped you as an athlete?
Oh, sure, sure. Well, I mean, I used to, I always say I'm the slowest person on the field, which was pretty true. I had really good stick work, and I was strong enough, but I was the last one to be first to the ball, so it took me a while to get there. So, but I could read the game really
Mm,
well, and I also paid attention to where people were moving to, not just where the ball was. So I was always seeing the bigger picture and listening to the body language of the other athletes on the field, reading the game that way, knowing what my teammates could do, really understanding their strengths and weaknesses. So I could listen and see, oh, that person knows likes to go downfield, and I could put the ball there. So we could communicate in a different way. I was a facilitator on the field from that standpoint. So that's really how it helped me athletically, along with the other emotional aspects of being, persevering and being able to be self-resilient and all the things that come from listening to yourself.
yeah. What, and we talk a little bit about that. So there's this one thing about being able to listen to others and read a room.
Yeah.
And I spent a large part of my life being a people pleaser, which is very outward focused, listening,
Yeah.
taking the temperature, trying to manage other people's emotions and expectations, largely to not pay attention to my own,
Mm.
right? So
It is
that,
a trap. I feel your pain.
yeah. So if other listeners, if other people have experienced that like I have, and I think it's interesting you call it a trap. It is a trap. How do you not fall into that trap? It's
Mm.
not me or you, it's us together. That means I also have to listen and pay attention to myself.
Yeah. Well, so many of those patterns, as we know in psychology, are they're wired in our brains. So it's all what's familiar. So we do have to listen to what we know isn't necessarily healthy, that
Mm,
these are just things that we're patterned to do for circumstances. Like obviously I was used to paying attention to my mother and putting that first. And so unwinding that is a lifelong journey. I don't want to say that that just happens when you start listening to yourself because it takes a lot.
mm,
But tuning in and trusting your own voice, it takes practice. And so it's at least starting with, I need to at least start to listen to that. And I've been good at that in most areas of my life, but again, some of those areas where it's so patterned, unwinding that is definitely harder. But it's important. And in that job, I actually learned a pretty hard lesson about not listening to myself when I was working with a family, and that you pay attention to those experiences where you learn, hey, that cost me something
Hmm.
that helps you do it differently, in the future. Because we do have to learn to do that in our own world, but it's not always easy.
Yeah,
Not always
absolutely.
easy. Yeah.
So after the job of this pilot program, where
Yeah.
you sounds like it was a fabulous experience, a lot of learning, where did you go after that?
So I went to get my master's in psychology. So I decided, I couldn't move on to something else until I had my master's. So I went to Penn, which was associated with the hospital, University of Pennsylvania, which was associated with the hospital that I was trained through. So I got my master's there and in psychology and education, and did work in outpatient treatment centers for drug and alcohol, and then from there, I worked in a home base. I had worked home base, and then I did school based while I got certified from that hospital in structural family therapy. And then I got hired by that hospital. So the people that trained me were now my colleagues,
Mm.
which was kind of interesting. So I spent 6 years heavily entrenched in how to fix systems and complex problems. And one-way mirrors, people behind the mirror say this to the family. I said it was my therapy training and my sales training. So this was before HMOs too. So we had 30-day stays in the hospital where we expected a family member to be there and partner with us to really help the child. So it was a very entrenched approach to make big shifts in family systems. Yeah.
Mm. System thinking is so interesting, I think, in organizations because we tend to go one way or the other. We just think very linearly and just
Mm-hmm.
about what's going on around us, or we're very detached and we think about what's going on in the system and people
Yeah.
become numbers or whatnot.
Yep.
But this integrated approach, which of course is what we need, is we need to think about both the individuality of the person's experience as they are situated within a system, but then also what is the system contributing to the
Yep.
health or lack thereof of what's going on in the culture.
Yeah.
So, when you think about healthy systems
Mm.
in organizations, uh, what do you see needs to be there, and what have you experienced just largely as absent?
Well, the easy answer for me is what I do because it's why I solved the problem or try, I've been solving the problem in organizations is that I I think organizations that listen, it's like oxygen, right? You need blood flow. You need oxygen in your system to survive. And listening is that oxygen in an organization. And when it doesn't exist, large or small, the companies, the the organism dies a little bit. People get disengaged. They get, very stuck. They don't feel like they're quietly quitting and all those things. So I always saw that the problems came down to all those misunderstandings. That's when I started working in businesses in my first coaching and consulting practice. That's the problem I was solving, misunderstandings.
Hmm.
Not what wasn't what was said, it was what wasn't heard, what wasn't understood. And you can't walk out of a meeting and not see that complexity. Almost any meeting you attend, there is not all, very rarely there is alignment or there's clarity about what the actions and who heard what. And we're really bad at that. And I think the confusing part is that I think people fear that when they listen, they have to do something to fix what they heard
Hmm.
rather than seeing true listening as the fix.
Mm.
Because we can't always enact what everybody says, but
Right.
there's other ways to make sure that listening is still part of the culture because you can't do everything the employees say they want you to do, but you can attend to them in a different way. And it's the same gift in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, this idea that a lot of times, of course, in conflict management, I see people, they, in a mediation and they want to, they're clearly right. Of course, the other person's the
Yeah.
villain and these are the facts. This other person's completely wrong. And they think they're going to not argue about the facts because there's nothing to argue. They're right. The other person's wrong. But so many times we're deceived in thinking it's about quote unquote the facts. But
Hmm.
it's very rarely about who did what when. It's what does it mean? Why is it
Mm,
meaningful? But there are largely different interpretations. When
yeah.
we think, well, you couldn't have a different interpretation. I was there. This is what happened.
Yeah.
I
Well,
have,
we know from watching accidents, right? Footage that that's why the police interview everybody, because
Right.
they're trying to find the truth, which is somewhere in the middle of everything, right?
Right. I was
Yeah.
just going to tell you the story I have of when I was dating my husband, and we were on a trip somewhere and we got in an accident. And I was on this Kentucky Parkway, and I was going 70 miles an hour, which is the speed limit. I come over this hill and I see it's a two lane. I see a car in the right lane, and I move over to the left. And as I move over to the left and I come beside him, he's going like 25 miles an hour. He turns into me.
Hmm.
And then whatever ensues. And so I'm telling you what happened.
Right.
According to the other guy who was a Kentucky worker, road worker, he didn't see me. I came out of like the sky.
Yeah.
And according to my now husband, he said, well, if I was driving, I saw this happening, it wouldn't have happened. Right. So, we have all these different points of view, but we
Yeah.
just think the truth is what I see. And that is the truth for me, or a truth.
Sure.
Right? It's not
Sure.
to demote it. I also think that when we listen sometimes, because my background's in philosophy, there's this perception that I'm giving tacit agreement. I am condoning your point of
Yeah.
view by
Yeah.
giving you
Yeah.
the time or the space to say whatever it is that you think is
Yeah.
the case.
Yeah. Well, so we know that understanding and agreement have very little to do with one another. So we have a client, and I won't name, but he's been such an adopter of the listening path. And I mean, he and the company have saved a lot of costs just by instituting this. There's lots of scenarios, but he said, Christine, what do you do if you vehemently oppose someone? And how do you enact this? And I said, well, let's take someone, and he used this example that's in the Ku Klux Klan, and you are vehemently opposed to that. I can still listen and understand the perspective of the person that shares that belief, even if I find it absolutely abhorrent. So but that's hard for most people to hold
Yeah,
because they don't have the tools or skills to know how to do that.
yeah,
And that's really the difference. So we're not leveled up. We're not trained to have difficult conversations. We don't have the skills or tools. So we're going on just our own kind of hopes and dreams that we know how we can listen. And that's why we're failing, and things lead to so many arguments because I don't believe we have a common language for listening and a common language and how we understand. And when you have that common language, it becomes about understanding before you start talking about whether you agree or disagree.
hmm. Oh, that's really important.
Yeah.
So, how do you get this common language? What is the common language as you understand it, and how do you get it?
Well, most of us have some idea of what good listening looks like. I think, active listening's been around since 1957. When I say I'm in the business of listening, people go, "Oh, active listening." No, 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 that's not exactly what we're doing, but that's what people know is like the gold standard, or what I say, the Kleenex of listening, right? It's the brand recognition. And I'm a believer. Like Carl Rogers was an American psychologist that created this, but he created it for psychologists.
Mm,
This is a very complicated thing to do. There's like 12 behaviors to do that when you actively listen. It's overwhelming to people. Don't hold judgment, pay attention, ask good questions, on and on and on. And so people are white knuckling it. That's not a language. That's just here's what to do, not how to do it.
mm,
So what I've done is taken the best practices of listening and created the tools that are around a metaphor or a story so that it anchors people.
mm.
And it's a process so that it's not complicated. And that's called the listening path. And so there's five primary tools that people need to learn the fundamentals of how to listen to understand. And it's based on hiking in the woods. You wouldn't go in unprepared, but we go into the conversational woods all the time unprepared. So we're winging it. So we
Right.
need the tools to listen and follow the path to understanding. So when you have a common language around how to do that, and I'll give you an example of that. Most people think that once they've heard the story or heard the person talk, that they understand.
Mhm.
It's a total myth,
Mm.
right? Nothing could be further from the truth, but that's what we think. We heard it, therefore it is. I get it. And then they often say, yeah, I understand. And to me, it's like you don't even understanding is a figment of your imagination because our brains contaminate what we hear.
Mhm.
It's the greatest enemy of listening. We pollute what we hear with our own thoughts and feelings, all the things in our subconscious brain. So when we think we've understood, we're already at a miss.
Yeah.
So part of what we have is a tool to show what you understand, and that's the beginning of true alignment and understanding. But most people don't even know that exists, that that's something they need to do.
Hmm. I like that you're calling it a path because it also shows that this is a process. I think a lot of times
Mhm.
people think, I've gained this skill or I've done this thing. I've listened, I've heard their story, end of
Yep,
story, right? But it
yep,
is a process, and the process of the dialogue, right?
yeah,
Listening is I think a lot in terms of dialogue, and the dialogue, the dialectic is back and forth. It starts with me and you. And
yeah.
then it becomes us because it is unique to being present and what we are how we are showing up and how we are going back and forth and how are we
Hmm.
mirroring, summering up. However, we're able to communicate with
Sure.
one another. And
Yeah,
it is a path, it is a journey.
yeah.
And being
Of
yes,
discovery, as I like to say. Yeah.
absolutely.
Here's what gets in the way, in my opinion, is that I'm thirsty and you're thirsty.
Hmm,
And what we're thirsting for is to be understood.
hmm,
So most people come to me and say, "Can you help my partner, spouse, child, parent listen?" Right?
yeah.
Not, "Can you help me listen?"
Hmm,
Because we're all in the desert and we're all thirsting to be understood. And it's really hard to give you my water when I'm thirsty.
yeah.
So we're coming from this perspective of thirst rather than than feeling satisfied. So it's very hard to give what you need.
Hmm,
And so in the absence of the common language, and this is probably some of the dilemma you and I have gotten into in terms of seeing what other people need and managing that, because we see it.
hmm,
Most people don't see it.
yeah.
So it's really hard to get something that you don't know how to give.
Yeah.
So that's part of why the common language dialogues become a lot easier if in the exchange
Hmm,
you're giving me the same listening language that I'm giving you versus
yeah.
I'm just the only one doing it. Now, chances I know how to get more of what I need because I know the tools how to give it. It's a little bit more complicated, but it can be done. But it's really hard if I'm the only one doing
Yeah. I love that. Thirsty. That's so
it.
powerful. I think when I'm in a mediation with people, largely the reason they have consented to be in a room with this person who has caused them pain, they think is now their nemesis, is because they're starving. It's like I'm at my wit's end. This
Yeah,
cannot continue anymore. But they're showing up harmed.
yeah,
There's this lack of trust. It's very
yeah,
hard to go on a journey with someone when you don't trust a word they're saying because of all of this that's going on in the background. And
yeah,
I'm a big believer in mediation. I think it can be beautiful and brilliant,
yeah,
but it all depends on how the person is showing up and what they're willing to do. And of course, the mediator can help, but you're just setting the conditions. And if the
sure.
person is unwilling to go on that journey or unwilling to, I always think conflict resolution starts with the person, right? It's all
Yeah.
about me. It is all about, you said being prepared, right? The biggest part about conflict resolution at work is yourself.
Hmm.
Because we largely put you're the problem, it's all out there, right? Like, I want you
Yeah.
to listen to me, you're the
Yeah.
problem, instead of what exactly is going on, what's going on with me, why is this going on here? Yeah, all those sorts of questions
Yep.
that de-escalate ourselves to get us in a space so that we can have the dialogue to be genuinely curious to go on that journey. I mean,
Yeah.
because people are stuck. How do you get unstuck? Well, they just
Yeah.
want to be unstuck,
Yeah. Right.
which I
Right.
understand, of course, but just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard to because and how did we get here in the first place? I
Mm,
call it death by a thousand cuts, right?
yeah.
We find somebody we love and then we just injure them unknowingly
Hmm.
with lack of listening and understanding. And those cuts add up until we're bleeding out. And then we're in mediation, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's certainly occasions where people do egregious things, and
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question. So I don't want to minimize that, but
No.
regardless, that's generally what's happening. It's an erosion of a relationship, not just a one incident of
Yeah.
a relationship. So, and uh, and whether that's at work or at home, but my experience is that when people get to the deeper stuff of what the perception and the I didn't know that, oh, I didn't realize that, that changes my perspective a little bit. It's
Yeah.
kind of like you see the person on the train and they're being, and then you realize, then you learn his wife just died of cancer.
Hmm.
then he has 3 kids and he's tired, then your whole perspective changes on
Yeah.
why he's acting that way. So, that's a silly example sort of kind of what happens in our relationships. We start losing the perspective the other person might have, and that doesn't inform us in a way that we can find common ground.
Yeah.
As you know, most people go to what they disagree about, not what they agree about, which is what
Right.
mediation is, right? Let's look. I had a couple come in when I was working at an employee assistance program before I started my own coaching practice, and I had a couple come in. I'd always do a little bit of counseling, and they said, married for 20 years, 2 kids, we have nothing in common. Nothing in common. I sat down, interesting. Wait, are you married? 2 kids, you have a shore house, you have nothing. And they were emphatic, nothing in common. So we got to unwind that a little bit because you
Yeah.
have a lot in common. You disagree about things, but you have a lot in common,
It's
which is
so
totally,
interesting. Yeah, the
yes.
narrative that we tell
Yeah.
ourselves. And that's
Yeah.
why when we are stuck, it's so helpful to have somebody help us out, to help us
Yeah.
see. I have tons of blind spots, right? But I don't know
Sure.
what they are, and we need others to help us when we
Yeah.
start catastrophizing or we say this all or nothing. And of course, mostly in conflict, we have dehumanized the other. And
Hmm.
so that they don't have this robust reason why. We can't even ask, why are they acting this way?
Yeah.
There is a
Yeah.
reason why people act in a particular way, but I'm so hurt or so upset, or this person
Yeah.
I've decided is so irrational. There's why would I even think about them? They're
Yeah.
just hurting me. And so to start to get into that place of humanizing them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I remember when I was in my dating days after being divorced at 47, then, you're always looking for red flags, red flags. And then I think I read something that said, what are your red flags? And I went, oh my God, I didn't ever ask myself that question. I don't have any red flags. Of course you do. If you're looking for, of course you do. And I was like, you have to turn the mirror back, right? Like you
Yeah.
have to look at yourself. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. But I do, I people don't realize this is listening's a negotiation skill.
Yeah.
And so if you want to get more of what you want, try to understand what you don't agree with, because then you'll at least know how to ask for what you want or how to get it done. So even if it's just because I want to get out of this a little bit financially more whole, or I want this to be less contentious so I can partner with them for my kids' sake. It doesn't mean you have to agree, but at least you get an insight into how to navigate what's important.
Yeah.
Because what you think is important to the other person may not be important, and that might not be so hard for you to give up
Hmm.
and to adjust to. So if you want to get more of what you need, this is a positive way to do it. Yeah.
That is such a wonderful point because a lot of times when get into a conversation, we lose sight of what the goal is, right? It's
Hmm.
very important. What am I trying to achieve? If I'm trying to achieve this person makes me feel good about myself again, or this person repents and says, you're right, I'm a horrible person, you're a wonderful person, what can I do? Right? Like, what is your realistic goal or
Yeah.
goals so that you don't get lost? Because we can kitchen sink it, and what about this, and what about that?
Hmm.
But well, what is it you actually want to achieve? So if you want to,
Yeah.
at work, if you want to address this particular behavior that's difficult for you, so that you can have a healthy work environment, right? That's depending on what it is that you want to address. That's more reasonable than I want this person fired. I
Yeah.
want all these other sorts of ways to fill the holes that I have in my heart, or,
Yeah. Yeah.
what are you really trying to achieve at work with an adult to adult conversation?
Yeah.
And the more you can keep that goal, I think the less you're going to fall into the traps of arguing, blaming,
Yeah.
instead of thinking, okay, well, this is achievable. We can talk about behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. So you start with the end in mind, is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you say. It's interesting because you just to go back to the listening path, there's a goal in listening as well. And I think it's not really what people think it is, but the goal of the path is to understand, not and really that's where then negotiation starts, right?
Hmm.
Not where it ends.
Yeah.
But when you're clear about things, when you understand, then you're in a different paradigm of the conversation. We
Yeah.
were working with a medical team in California, the leadership team, and for a large hospital. And we have a game that we use in our facilitated workshops because I always say we have to put listening in people's hands. Otherwise it's not tangible. It's really hard to, see the fog in front of you,
Yeah.
catch it, touch it. And we're playing a game, and you have to, at the end of the game, you have to write down what you think the insight of the story that you just listened to is. And interestingly, and it happens all the time, 95 to 100% of the answers are the same.
Mm.
And it's like, well, how often does that happen? That we all listened, understood, or it came to the same understanding. So it's pretty compelling. One of the people in the workshop said, it feels like that's when the real conversation starts.
Mhm.
So that's exactly right. Because now you're not wondering, do I agree with that person? That we all have the same understanding. We've agreed on that. We get it. And now we can talk about what to do next, where we don't want to do this or do that, because we have the same perception. We're clearing up the accident story. We're
Mhm.
all seeing the same thing.
Mhm.
And when you listen in a different way, when you listen with a process and a common language, you don't miss the things um, in the conversation. So you come to that understanding, and then work gets done.
Yeah, it is the process of the dialogue. We start conversation many times with the position. This is what I
Hmm.
want. This is what needs
Yeah,
to happen. But if we can do the work ahead of time and de-escalate ourselves to be present and act genuinely curious with the
yeah,
knowledge that I have my understanding, but I don't really know why or what's
yeah,
going on or what's valuable. And it isn't until I get that well, the real solution is going to present itself. It is the
yeah,
process of the dialogue. But I love again this imagery of the path because so many times we just want to go around the mountain. We want to go on the outside because
yeah,
why do I need to do it? Why do I need to be in a room or a conversation with that person?
yeah, yeah,
And I think that's, that's a good question. Why? And it goes back, well, what is it that you want and how are
yeah.
you going to achieve it?
Yeah, and what matters, so well, there's a famous book by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. And he talks about hostage negotiation, and how you can't not negotiate for hostages, but you don't want to say you take half and I'll take half and we'll call it a day. It doesn't work that way. You have to
Right.
get out with it all. So part of it is, how do you understand what the needs of the people, what they really want, and how do you get close to understanding the hostage takers so that you can get out with it all? Because if you go in, and he disrupted the way this process was done, because it used to be an empower and control and try to bully and overtake the hostage takers rather than get them to cooperate to
Mhm.
release the hostages. That's the difference. And I mean, I had a client once. We do something, I call it a best failure story. What's a mistake you made and something great that you learned from it, or the best thing you've learned from it? And his moral of his story was, you never know who you married until you meet them in divorce court. And I
Interesting.
thought that was quite a statement. Isn't That's back to my red flags. Isn't that true for all of us
Yeah.
to some degree? So who we married may not be who we're trying to divorce, but how do we want to get out of this situation? How do we want to get out of the marriage as without destroying ourselves financially, destroying our kids? That might feel like a hostage negotiation.
Hmm. Yeah.
But what do lawyers do? Many of them perpetuate the fight
Hmm.
so that they get rich,
Hmm.
right? Versus, how can we disagree and cooperate? And maybe we both are in a hostage negotiation, but if we took it from that approach, a lot less pain would actually get caused.
Right. And we want to reduce pain. So listening matters, right? I mean,
Yeah,
what else do we have? I mean, if we don't listen, it's always, these questions like, well, what if we don't take this tact?
yeah,
What's likely to happen?
yeah.
So, can you tell us about a conflict that you've had at work and how you dealt with it? Maybe your younger self and knowing what you know now, how if you would do anything differently now?
Yeah. It's interesting because I was thinking as we were talking about the home-based story. So we worked in partners. So because going to people's houses, it wasn't always this, we were in difficult areas at
Sure.
times. And my partner was 35 and I was 22, so she was old to me. I loved her dearly, but she had a social work background, and she had 12, 15 years of experience. as a social worker where she used to go out and pick up children, like adjudicated kids that ran away. She had authority to do that. So
Mhm.
we had this case, and she was the primary therapist. I was the secondary. So we would have different roles there. And we went to a house where we were supposed to see a mother and a daughter, and the daughter wasn't there, and the mother was concerned she ran away. So my partner went into social work. Now we had no authority in this job, none. She was in the wrong realm. She went into social worker mode, and the mother said, I think she's at this friend's house. So we're in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, out in the middle of the country, and she get to this house, the friend's house, and there the daughter is, and they're outside, the mother, the friend, and the daughter. And my partner Sue went up to the daughter and started talking to her and said, "We need to take you home," and blah 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 blah. Well, out of the house comes the mother, and Sue starts arguing with the mother. She's like, "What are you doing here?" They start arguing. I'm watching this like a movie, and I'm, what are we doing? And then as they were arguing, three men, young men, came out of the house, surrounded this woman like a queen bee.
Mhm.
And I'm starting to go, this isn't good.
Mhm.
But she couldn't see it. She was in
Mhm.
fight mode.
Mhm.
So I finally went, hold on, wait. I said, you don't know who we are, to the mother. I looked her right, you don't know who we are. Here's who we are. This is where we're from. We were just concerned about the daughter. We have no right to be here. We have no authority to take her. You must be upset that we showed up on your property without announcement. The mother's just concerned about the daughter. As I started to talk, the men just kind of started to back up. The
Mhm.
mother started to her posture settled down. Thankfully, Sue stopped talking.
Mhm.
I just basically told the mother the story she was telling herself
Mhm.
and how angry she was that we were here. I said, "Is it okay if we tell the mother the daughter's here and she's safe?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, we're going to leave. We're sorry we bothered you. Thank you for having us." We walked to our car. We left, and Sue got in the car and she went, "Thank you for doing that." She had
Mhm.
lost her mind. She had
Mhm.
lost her perspective. She was so used to having authority. Well,
Mhm.
no, it wasn't smart even if she had authority.
Mhm.
But that's what happens. We kind of go myopic and just go, "I'm going to fight you." And we had no right to be there. I could appreciate why the mother was upset.
Mhm.
We were out of line.
Yeah.
We didn't come in and this was her home. We were threatening her, not the other way around.
Mhm.
So sometimes that's what it takes. It takes, let me tell you what I think you're telling yourself. Just that de-escalates a lot of things.
Mhm. That's a great story for a variety of reasons. And one is that even if you're in this space professionally, we can we can
Be
get
human?
caught. We can be human. And to have a system where we're not out there by ourselves, right? Whether
Yeah,
that's we have mentors or coaches or somebody in our corner who can look and say, can help us out when we are
yeah,
digging in.
yeah,
And largely we say thank you
yeah,
because I couldn't see it. And when we're caught in those modes, especially if we are in the fight mode, for somebody to have to calm us down,
yeah.
because yeah, as you said, we're all human.
Yeah. This is where my listening skills and the fact that I could see the field, like
Hmm.
back to the sports metaphor, that I could see what was happening beyond. I could see how the mother was escalating. I could appreciate why. I knew what story she was telling herself. That's listening, right?
Hmm.
If I imagining, hey, I get you versus I'm going to fight you.
Hmm.
Don't you dare. So, but it's hard to do. It's hard to do without being trained. I just was trained very young.
Hmm.
I was raised by good listeners. I had to listen to my mother in a different way. And I built that muscle pretty early in my life. Certainly improved, and the more emotional intelligence you develop, which was what listening helps do too, the more you self-regulate your emotions. So that doesn't, get you so out of kilter when somebody says something so egregious or that you disagree with. You can start to say, tell me more instead of argue back.
Yeah, and it's also a really illustrative of what power is, right?
Hmm.
So many times we think power is simple, shock and awe. It's
Yeah,
well, think about nonviolent communication, right? So what really is power? And power is what you did, right?
yeah,
The ability to really influence whoever's in front of you for the good, right? To take the emotions down
yeah,
so that we can make the progress of what it is that we want.
Yeah.
And we can forget that, especially when we're caught in a conflict, we're caught in pain. We feel that this is unjust, unfair. We've not being treated well, and we're in a defensive mode.
Yeah. Which makes us offensive sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about your book if we want to find out more about
Sure.
the listening path and that listening matters and how to get better at it.
The book is called What Is It Costing You Not to Listen? You can't solve a problem you don't know you have. So
Hmm.
part of it is, what is it costing you? So it's the power of understanding is really what the book is about. So, and then we work with businesses and provide workshops and keynotes and sessions to help build the skill of listening. We also have a classroom program for elementary schools that's licensable to teach young children this skill early in life. That's really our mission, is to create a revolution where we start to teach and educate listening from elementary school to corporations. This long overlooked skill that will change dynamically how we interact and how we solve problems.
That's wonderful. I mean, yeah, earlier is the better, the sooner we can do it, right?
Yeah,
And develop those habits because we all have habits of listening, habits of conflict resolution, management, whether or not we are aware of them, we have them, and
yeah.
those are our default. So one of my last questions for you is imagine that you are in a work environment and you are working on being a better listener. You're trying to go down this path, but maybe you have coworkers or a boss that you find isn't a listener, isn't
Hmm.
willing to, they just are might makes right or whatever it is. And it's feels very demoralizing or it's a very bad environment.
Hmm.
What advice would you have for that person?
Well, this is part of listening to yourself, because I've worked with a lot of people over the years around what they consider a difficult person that's making their job miserable, whether that's a boss, a coworker. And it's you gotta pick your trade-offs, right? So is it worth it for you to stay, even if you can manage it better? So you always have to ask yourself that. I worked with someone in the home-based program, and it was tough sometimes, and there was some toxic stuff at times in the agency that I had. This program was grant funded through. But she said, I can always leave. Like, I know I can leave. I'm always happy because I know I
Mm,
don't have to stay. I think we have to stay.
mm,
So just giving yourself the permission that no, you don't, but you have to decide if it's worth it for you or not. And then after that, the better you are at managing things, the easier it becomes. I worked with a CEO that had a difficult board member. This was many years ago. I wrote about this in the book. And he was really struggling as a young CEO. This board member would rile him up. He didn't know how to manage him. He was very challenging. Probably the smartest guy in the room, by the way, the board member.
mhm,
And I helped him manage this guy, listen to him differently, help him feel acknowledged, blah, blah, blah. And he came back from the meeting. He goes, "That wasn't so bad." This guy was very gregarious. He goes, "That was great. That worked really well." And I go, "Yep. And here's the rub." And he goes, "What?" I said, "Every time.
mm,
You have to do it every time. It's not a one-off. It's not like I did that and now it's fixed.
mhm.
This is how you have to manage every conversation." And he's like, "Oh." So it can feel exhausting, but it still works.
Mm.
It's just you have to know, if you're with somebody that's not willing to give back and reciprocate, that you have to manage to that all the time, and you have to decide if that trade-off's worth it.
Yeah. Again, conflict management is about personal empowerment. The better you get at self-knowledge and your listening skills, then the more
Hmm.
you're able to put yourself in a position to make those conscious choices, right? So
Yeah,
there's going to be pain, there's going to be difficulty, but when you're more in the driver's seat instead of being up
yeah.
here and unknowing, then you're more likely, and you can start telling yourself different stories. Of
Hmm.
course, sometimes people can't move jobs depending because of
Of
location,
course, of course.
but we so too often tell ourselves we can't when
Right.
actually we do
Yeah,
have other choices, but we don't see them
yeah.
because we are so escalated and we don't know how to listen to ourselves and start that process.
And it feels really unfair. It
Hmm.
feels really unfair. I went out to an organization. It was a government. court many years ago, and the judge was appointed by the governor, and he was very toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the head of the department was taking all the blame. Her blood pressure was over 200. I mean, she was in physical danger, and she did not feel like she could leave
Mm-hmm.
because she didn't want to leave everybody else. I mean, this is a guy that took the doors off offices, like people just maintenance
Mm-hmm.
came, all the doors were off. It was some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, "Can you not leave?" And she's like, "I really can't." Well, she could transfer anywhere she wanted at this time. It didn't feel fair to her. Why should I have to reorient because this guy is so out of control? And that's part of the thing we get into. It isn't always fair.
Yeah.
And that's a hard pill to swallow. But what's healthy for you is,
Yeah.
and so, she ultimately did make a transfer because, it was, again, this was like 20 years ago, but it was so toxic that I said, you're gonna die if you're not, if so you got to look at what works for you, but it's not necessarily going to feel good initially
Yeah.
because it's going to feel unfair.
And I love that you said that because, you know, I have people will say, why do I have to be the adult in the room? Why do I? And well, the question is, who do you want to be?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
You
it's
don't have to be. Yeah.
right. Who do you want to be? What are your values? What does it mean for you to be a professional?
Yeah.
And it's independent of what anybody else does. It's not
Yeah.
about them. This is about
Yeah.
you and the decisions you're going to make. This is your life. And a lot of that is when you take back that power, then you're able to see more choices
Hmm.
and the trade-offs, right? I hear that. I also hear people saying, I can't leave because I'm going to leave these people unprotected.
Yeah.
Well, if you're dead or if you're so burned out or,
Yeah.
you know, there are those real considerations. We know stress is a literal killer, right?
Yeah.
We know
Yeah.
people suffer real harm
Yeah.
from toxic environments, harm to themselves, harm in just a variety of ways, and that has to be taken seriously.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard. But when we're in, it's like, I was in an auto accident when I was 28, and I had chronic pain for 3 years when that went acute when I was 31. So my life changed on a dime.
Mm,
And when you become the patient
mm,
and the one in pain, that's why they tell you have a health advocate or somebody with you because you can't see straight.
mm.
And so in those situations, we lose perspective because we're hurting, we're in pain, we're suffering, and it's like a medical condition. And so that's why you want to have those outside voices where people make it sound simple. Oh, just get a divorce or just leave. Or well, it's not always that simple, but
No.
it is about getting some perspective so that you're not in that swirl, without some guidance because it can swallow you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my last question for you, as this time is almost up, I can't believe it, but as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, which is the baseline, but that people will be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
Well, I think we need to upskill who's coming into the workplace.
Mm,
I think, look, management is changing because of the generations that are coming into the workplace, and it should change because the way we used to manage and motivate people has never really been the right way. Carrots and sticks aren't
right.
the way to do it anyway. So I think now, thankfully, these generations, millennials, the younger millennials, and the Z's are going, we don't want that. Like, so we're forcing that change, but we also have to help the kids that grew up in the digital world, like, improve their ability, their communication abilities, that
Mhm.
muscle, so that they can work in an environment as well that makes sense for the business to run. So we really need to help, I believe, that language improve from top down,
Mhm.
from both an age perspective and a management perspective, because now it really is about how do we take care of each other
Mhm.
in the workplace and get the work done, not
Mhm.
just do more work.
Right.
But I think that should be a two-way street.
Yeah.
I think that should, like, when you're talking about intergenerational things, I don't think that's a one-way endeavor
No.
that, a boomer should go, or an Xer should manage down. I think the Z's need to manage up just as much. It's a communication, and that care is a two-way street.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I think if we take diversity seriously as we ought to, because the people that we work for and with, they're the community, and we
Yeah.
have so much to learn from each other.
Yeah.
And if we think it's just one side has to capitulate to the other, then we're losing. If you want to win in the future, it's
Yeah.
how do you really embrace the people that you have in the
Hmm.
year that you're in and help and take advantage of that. I mean, that's how we get psychological safety and
Yeah.
belonging and all of these things. It's not whoever's the oldest or the
Yeah.
youngest is right. There are many right ways, good ways, and ways in which we need to, I love the upscale
Yeah.
for the reality of business and work life today.
I was at a networking event last night with CIOs. They did a panel all around cybersecurity. So, and one of the gentlemen said, he works for the Department of Human Services, and they don't have nearly the resources to hire, but he said, I look for people with the emotional skills, the emotional quotient. I can teach them the rest.
Hmm.
So I think, we've known for a long time this is the differentiator,
Yeah.
but to real success. But this has to become not the exception, but more the rule,
Yeah.
which is again why I believe we need to teach listening young, because this is the foundation of emotional intelligence, self-awareness and other awareness. And being able to find meaning and understanding is the foundation of building your emotional quotient. So we need to make that more the norm rather than the exception. But we don't do that in schools. We teach what to know, what to be smart about, how to score to the test. We're kind of valuing things that don't have as much run rate, in my opinion.
Yeah. Listening is about community, right?
Hmm.
It's not me or you, it's us together and
Hmm.
advocating for myself and the other and listening to what the other or the
Yeah.
others want. That's, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, Christine, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a delightful conversation. It
Yes. Thank you very much, Mary. I appreciate it.
was lovely meeting you.
You too.
Christine, thank you for being on Conflict Managed and the work you're doing to help people have better lives through developing their listening skills. And much more, of course. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, if you would take just a moment and rate it and like it, it really helps us out. I encourage you to check out Christine's book, What Is It Costing You Not to Listen? And also mine, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure. That's 80 tips of what not to do, and it looks at what we ought to do instead to have healthy work environments. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.